After our 10,000-foot big picture opening, in this lecture, we'll get down on a closer level. We'll look down a metaphorical microscope and examine our anxiety moment to moment. We'll break down an anxious moment into its most basic components, like breaking down a molecule into individual atoms, to really understand what anxiety is made of and how we can harness that understanding to create change. Next, we'll do a deep dive on thoughts. Thoughts are fast and automatic, and in order to challenge or accept them, we first have to be able to catch and articulate them. So I'll walk you through how to do that. Then, we'll set some goals. If anxiety were no longer a problem in your life, what would you be doing? What would you do more or less of? What would you stop avoiding? We'll set up a customized program just for you that we'll refer to throughout the course. After that, I'll introduce you to some of the core scientific concepts behind anxiety treatment, specifically exposure and inhibitory learning. And finally, we'll talk about values and plot a course toward the life you want to live and the person you want to be. First up, here's the microscope I promised you. Let's take a look at a model of emotion. This comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. An anxious moment consists of three components. In our model, as you can see, we have three elements floating in a larger field. Let's think of the larger field, the whole setting, as an emotion. In this case, anxiety. There are three parts to that anxiety. First is cognition, our thoughts. Thoughts can be words, what we say to ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, the running commentary that occurs as we live our lives. Thoughts can also be images. We often see pictures and play out movies in our mind's eye. Memories of the past, imaginary scenarios we've made up, predictions of the future. Next is our physiological sensations, the physical changes that happen in our body. When we're anxious, this could mean muscle tension, sweating, our extremities getting cold, dry mouth, or many others. These sensations are the physical manifestation of anxiety. Finally, the third element is our behavior. Our behaviors are our actions, the things we do. Some behaviors are visible, but some are invisible. If I saw a movie of your day, I would see you perform behavior after behavior, but only you would know about invisible behaviors like worry, procrastination, rumination, or avoidance. But even if no one can see us doing them, we're still doing them. And importantly, we're doing them instead of doing something else. Each of these three components interacts with the others. None of them exists in a vacuum. But anxiety can start with any of the three and amplify from there. For example, anxiety may start with a physiological sensation. Maybe my chest feels tight. And that might lead to a thought. Oh no, what if I'm having a heart attack? And that might in turn lead to a behavior, like going to the emergency room or searching online for heart attack symptoms. Or anxiety may start with a thought. My friend hasn't texted me back. What if she's mad at me? That might lead to physiological sensations, a shot of adrenaline, a drop of our stomach. And that might in turn lead to behavior, like texting again to check in or asking another friend for reassurance. Finally, anxiety can start with a behavior, giving an incorrect answer to a question in a work meeting. And you guessed it, that can cascade into thoughts. Oh no, everyone must think I'm so stupid. And sensations, like an increased heart rate or a feeling of tension. The three circles are all connected with double-headed arrows. Not only can they all interact with and amplify each other in any direction, but most importantly, the three components come together to create our emotions. Now it's your turn to give it a try. You may wish to jot this down so you can see the whole picture. In fact, there will be lots of exercises and facts throughout the course where it could be useful for you to write things down. So I invite you to have a notebook at hand or start a new document on your computer to get the most out of this course. Here's our exercise. Think of a recent anxious moment, a time you felt your anxiety spike a little. Let's break that moment down into the three components. First, what was happening in your body at that moment? Maybe you broke into a sweat, felt your heart pound, trembled, had trouble getting air, felt tingling or numbness in your hands, or suddenly had to pee. maybe it was more subtle. Containing 3 ingredients that go into the metaphorical dish of your anxious moment. Now, the great thing about having 3 components to emotion is that it gives us 3 points of intervention. We can change any of these 3 components and it will affect the other 2. Plus, remember how I said the larger field is the emotion? Changing any of the 3 components or changing our relationship to any of the 3 components will change the resulting feeling or how we perceive the feeling. As we move through this course, we'll touch on each of the 3 components. For physiology, we'll learn to calm our bodies with breathing techniques and grounding, and we'll learn to approach our physical sensations and deliberately practice them so they're not so aversive. In fact, over time, they may become downright boring. With our thoughts, we'll learn to challenge them and to accept them for simply what they are. Not truth, but just thoughts. Finally, with behaviors, we'll learn to act in accordance with our values rather than our fears. And we'll test drive some new behaviors to see if they bring us closer to living the life we want to live. Next up is our deep dive on thoughts. If we're wired through genetics or experience to have overgrown anxiety, to be on the anxious side, the effect is like wearing a pair of purple sunglasses that influence our perception of the world. No matter what we're looking at, our glasses tint the world purple. But that means we see the world a little bit inaccurately. When we're wired to worry, our metaphorical glasses affect how we take in and organize information and interpret situations, and they drive our emotional response. They color the world with an overall tint of an anxious core belief, a fundamental thought like, the world is a dangerous place, or bad things can happen at any moment, or people will reject me if I do things wrong. Sometimes these beliefs are accurate, but overall, they make us see the world inaccurately because then, when we encounter ambiguous, uncertain, or incomplete information, we filter it through our purple sunglasses and see it in an anxious way. For example, your mom calls at an unusual time. What would your brain automatically think filtered through the purple anxiety sunglasses? Or your boss calls you into her office. Again, what would your brain automatically think if it's wearing those sunglasses? Finally, you're at home alone and you hear a door slam. What does your brain automatically do given the sunglasses? Wearing our metaphorical purple glasses makes us more easily interpret the scenarios as something terrible has happened, I'm in trouble, or there's an intruder, because those thoughts fit our filter. And those interpretations can become a particularly significant problem if anxious interpretations increase anxious feelings, and those anxious feelings can trigger more anxious thoughts, and round we go. And then, you guessed it, we're more likely to end up in avoidance, which, as we know, maintains and even grows our anxiety. Someone without our metaphorical purple sunglasses, however, might be more likely to think something more neutral, like, "What's up, Mom? Maybe my boss has a question," or, "Gee, it must be windy today." Now, Our goal isn't to switch to rose-colored glasses. We don't want to swap out inaccurate anxious thinking for inaccurate positive thinking. Instead, we want to switch to clear glasses to look at the world more accurately. Thinking more accurately can take some practice because our anxious thoughts are fast and automatic. In fact, sometimes we aren't even aware that thoughts are going through our head. We're programmed to have fast, automatic thoughts because if we needed to think deliberately about every thought that came into our mind, we would never get anything done. We are primed to be efficient. We make snap judgments, jump to conclusions, and use shortcuts and heuristics. Because thoughts are so fast and so automatic, our first necessary step is to slow down and take a step back. When we slow down, we can get access to our thoughts, an insight into how we think, and apply change or acceptance or both. Slowing down and examining our thoughts can take some getting used to. We're so used to them being automatic. It takes practice, so be patient with yourself as you learn to catch, examine, and challenge your thoughts. So, here's how to catch your anxious thoughts so you can either challenge or accept them. One method to catch your anxious thoughts is to use your emotions as a proxy. When you feel your mood start to shift, when you start to feel anxious or worried or irritable or any other change in emotion, ask yourself, what just went through my head? And that will help you find your thought. Another method is to start with a physical sensation. Sometimes all we're aware of in an anxious moment is something physiological, like a drop in our stomach or a surge of adrenaline. Or maybe we have a visceral reaction like, oh no, or no problem. To translate vague, even incomprehensible sounds or physical sensations into everyday language, ask yourself, if that exclamation or sensation could talk, what would it be saying? For example, if uh-oh could talk, what would it be saying? If that tension in our neck could talk, what would it be saying? If uh-oh could explain itself, maybe it would say, I don't know how to start this work project, and the team is going to think I'm stupid. If that neck tension could talk, maybe it would be saying, I'm not going to know anyone at Jaime's party and end up standing there like an idiot. Here's another common thought issue. Anxious thoughts often pose themselves as questions, like, what if something bad happens? What if everybody thinks I'm weird? It's hard to challenge a question. So when your brain comes up with anxious what ifs, rearrange them into a statement. What if something bad happens becomes the declarative statement, something bad is going to happen. What if everybody thinks I'm weird turns into the statement, everybody will think I'm weird. With your question arranged as a statement, now it's in a more solid, less slippery form that allows you to apply tools and challenge it. Now that you've learned the basics of catching anxious thoughts, you'll be all warmed up when we put those clear glasses to work throughout the rest of the course. Now, here's the fun part. Let's customize all of this to you and your life. Let's make some goals. When I work with clients, we set goals early on. They act as a North Star to help guide our work together. When we feel like we're getting lost in the weeds or off course, revisiting the goals gets us back on track. For you, if anxiety was no longer a problem in your life, if you had faced your fears and come out the other side, what would you be doing? What would be different in your life? Notice the phrasing. If anxiety were no longer a problem in your life, what would you be doing? What would you be doing more or less often if you were living the life you want? What would you no longer avoid if you were on the other side of anxiety? Notice I don't say, if you had no anxiety, what would you be doing? As we determined from the bear and the blueberry bush story, or our metaphor about pruning the apple tree, anxiety is an important emotion we don't want to get rid of. We just want to turn down the volume. Also, notice that the next part of the question was, what would you be doing? That's because we want our goals to be behavioral, goals we can observe and achieve. We want to know when we've accomplished them. A good goal can be checked off on a list. Here's how to make a goal behavioral. Let's take a goal like, be more confident. That's a wonderful goal, but it's kind of fuzzy, kind of vague. We could always be more confident. Instead, ask yourself, what would I be doing if I felt more confident? What would I be able to do? Maybe you'd be accepting invitations rather than turning them down. Maybe you'd be traveling to see family more often. Or maybe you'd feel less obligated to travel to see family and do it less often. Ask, what would I be doing? And then those things become your goals. Your goals can be big, small, or anything in between. Let's start small. If you were on the other side of anxiety, maybe you'd ask the waiter for a refill on your water rather than waiting for him to notice. Maybe you'd initiate conversation with your neighbor rather than say hi but keep on walking. Maybe you'd wash your hands once before you start preparing dinner or after touching raw meat, but not every time your brain tells you they're contaminated. Maybe you'd sign up for that Zumba class that looks so fun and move past your fear that a pounding heart will make you feel like you're going to lose control. Goals can also be big. If you were on the other side of anxiety, maybe you'd start dating again. Maybe you'd get that colonoscopy or that mammogram. Maybe you'd ask for the raise you've been too intimidated to ask for until now. I want to emphasize that what's a big goal and what's a small goal isn't objective. It's whatever's big or small for you. Getting on an elevator might be something you do without thinking, but posting on Instagram takes half an hour and 6 rounds of revising your caption so people don't think it's stupid. Meanwhile, your friend has posted 4 times before noon, but thanks to claustrophobia, would rather take the stairs to their 10th floor office than stand in an elevator. Everyone is different, so don't compare what's hard for you to what's easy for someone else. Come up with 8 to 12 goals. We'll call this your challenge list. Channel your inner Goldilocks and the 3 Bears as you create a list for yourself. Some big, some small, some in between. Write these down in any order so you can refer to them later. Go ahead and pause this video for as long as you need to brainstorm your challenge list. What would you be doing if you had faced down your fears and avoidance and were on the other side of your anxiety? You may have guessed where we're going with this. We'll work our way through all these goals. We'll start small and work our way up. Facing your fears, in psychology speak, is called exposure. I know that sounds like something that results in a misdemeanor charge, but it's just a technical way of saying practice. Exposure therapy is the cornerstone of anxiety treatment and is the single best way to gather evidence that refutes those 2 lies of anxiety. 1, whatever I avoided was really and truly dangerous, and 2, I couldn't have handled it anyway. When we approach our fears rather than avoiding them, we have experiences that chip away at both of those lies. Can we nerd out for a bit? Let's look under the hood and talk about how exposure actually works. As we face our fears, we experience something called inhibitory learning. Whether we're afraid of failure or strangers or doorknobs, when we practice facing our fears, small and big, we learn new information about safety. We learn that, for example, raising our hand in class is generally safe, which inhibits the original fear, hence inhibitory learning. Our goal is to learn new information about safety so strongly that we permanently inhibit that original fear. Here's another way to think about it. When we go on a hike, we usually hike on well-established trails that cut through the forest. Lots of people hike on these trails. They're well-worn and easy to navigate. Through repeated experiences, your brain has a well-worn path where your anxiety flows easily. It's a clear path that, every time avoidance occurs or the fear gets reinforced, gets more and more established over the years. So then, when we face our fears and try out new thoughts, behaviors, and physiological sensations, it's like establishing a new hiking trail. And our job is to hike down that new path so often and so thoroughly that it eventually becomes an even easier trail to hike than the old one. When we're on this side of facing our fears, when we aren't sure how our challenge list is going to turn out, it's normal to feel ambivalent, to not be sure if we're ready. But I guarantee you don't have to be gung-ho, ready to rock, or ready to stride out into the world to face your fears and start bushwhacking away at that new hiking trail with gusto, because that's not actually how it works. That's not how confidence is built. Being ready assumes we have to feel like doing something before we do it. We have to feel like going to the gym, feel like sitting down and playing the piano. We think feeling has to precede action, but that's not the case. We're going to put action first, and then, I'll bet you, feeling will catch up. Readiness will catch up. Think of times you might have laced up your shoes to go exercise, maybe for a walk or for the hike we've been alluding to, even though you didn't feel like it. But then, once you got out there, once you were on your way and had settled in, you got into the rhythm of the walk, you felt inspired or you felt more energized. In short, you were glad you did it. Your feelings caught up. Same thing with sitting down to play the piano or, say, getting on the yoga mat. Even if you don't feel like it at first, maybe just playing around will become enjoyable, even inspirational. Put action first, and feeling will catch up. Motivation will catch up. And, apropos to our situation, confidence will catch up. Now, here's the last bit about facing your fears through your challenge list. Why bother to go through all this? What's the point? Let me assure you, I'm not here to torture you or to make your hair stand on end. We're not going to challenge ourselves just because it's supposed to be good for us, like eating our vegetables. We're here to change things up for a reason, which brings us to values. Values can consist of anything you find important, meaningful, or valuable. Your kids, nature, human connection, service, books, helping, your faith, sobriety, the environment, independence, your friendships, anything at all. Simply put, your values are whatever is important and meaningful to you. Living your values leads to a meaningful, purposeful life. According to Dr. Kelly Wilson, one of the founders of ACT, and Drs. Michael Tuhig and Clarissa Ong, co-authors of the insightful book, The Anxious Perfectionist, a value has 4 parts. 1, it's freely chosen. A value is never coercive or obligatory. No other person or institution tells you that you have to care about it. 2, it's intrinsically meaningful to you, meaning you would care about it even if no one else ever knew. 3, it's within your control, meaning it's not contingent upon other people like being loved or approved of. And 4th, it's continuous. It's the opposite of a goal in that it can never be checked off on a list. Think of a goal as a destination and a value as a direction. Going to Boston is a goal. You can check it off on a list. But going east is a value. You can always go more east. Therefore, retire early isn't a value, nor is write the great American novel. Those are goals, metaphorical destinations. They can be checked off on a list. But values lead to those goals. In the case of retiring early, the values might be financial security, wealth, leisure, or freedom. The values associated with writing our novel might be self-expression, creativity, books, or the craft of writing. Just like a violinist is never done practicing the violin, or a person of faith is never done practicing their religion, we're never done living our values. We can always move in the direction of our values. The freely chosen part is also significant, and we'll come back to it later in the course. But here's a preview. Values are different from rules. They're never obligatory or dutiful. You freely choose your values and, therefore, are likely willing to tolerate some inconvenience, discomfort, or hassle in order to do so. For example, I value supporting my son's interests and activities, so I'm willing to sit through a squawky middle school orchestra performance. If I were to do that without valuing showing support for him and his activities, I'd likely feel annoyed or resentful, not to mention needing some headache medicine. You might value a certain social cause and therefore show up to a protest on a beautiful Saturday afternoon when you could otherwise be at the beach. You might value supporting local business, and you're willing to pay a little more or drive out of your way rather than just ordering from a big online retailer. We never have to follow our values. We choose our actions. Neither are our values static. They're not established once and remain for all time. Your values will change throughout your life as you grow, change, and evolve. But following values will allow us to live a life that's important and meaningful to us. That's why we're bothering to face our fears through our challenge list. In order to be the person we want to be, to live the life we want to live, we want to stop letting our anxiety decide how we show up in the world and start letting our values, what's important and meaningful to us, guide how we live, to quote the poet Mary Oliver, our one wild and precious life. After all, values are meant to be lived, not just held. Let's go put them into action. And with that, we'll dig into some specific tools and techniques, starting with our thoughts, in the next lecture. See you there.